Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning scoop presented by the Arizona Capital Times, our elections fair in Arizona. I'm Steve Goldstein. We're joined by Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers, Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates, and Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here.
Morning.
Thank you.
The group Save Democracy AZ is asking, is there a problem in not just who we elect, but rather how we elect? And that is part of what we will be discussing today. Stephen Richer, let me start off with you just to go over some numbers. Explain for people, as if they don't already know, how independents are able to vote in Arizona and Maricopa County, and how the numbers turned out for our August primary and how they compared to either expectations or past years.
We have two very different electorates, and I think it's important to recognize that the population that participates in an August primary is very different from the population that votes in a November general election. So Arizona and Maricopa County are divided roughly 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between Republicans, Democrats, and independents in terms of voter registration. But in terms of who participates in the August primary, you see a steep decline in terms of participation rates from a general election to a primary, particularly with independents. And so, like I said, voter registration is roughly a third, a third, a third. But for the 2022 primary, Republican turnout was about 49% in Maricopa County. Democratic turnout was 41%, Libertarian 14%. And here's the big one because it makes up a big population. Independents 14%. And if you compare that with the 2020 general election turnout, you had Republicans at 87%, Democrats 85%, and independents at 69%. So that's really where the humongous drop-off is. And as a result, you have, like I said, a very different electorate from November to August.
We're going to get into this a lot more deeply, but Stephen, one more follow-up for you, because this is sort of the big question of our webinar here in our discussion. Would a different system in Arizona be more encouraging to have independents take part? Is the primary system at this point really set up to feed registered Republicans and registered Democrats?
I don't know. What I do know is that despite all of our exhortations, all of our encouragement, and all of our information, we had the highest independent participation rate ever for an August primary, but it was still very, very low, 14%. So, I don't know. I think there are some things that I've thought about simply having to opt in, for instance, to the August primary. Independents have to select a ballot, even if they are on the permanent early voting list, the active early voting list. That's different than from Republicans and Democrats. So, I don't know. Or is it just that they really don't choose to participate in what they see as internal party decision making, and so would a change of format alter that? I don't know.
Speaker Bowers, we often hear voters, at least whether it's polling or just anecdotally, use the phrase getting things done. We want elected officials who will get things done. Often that will mean working across the aisle, as we say. You're someone, better than I, who has accomplished a lot in the realm of politics and elected office, and yet you lost in your latest primary. Other examples, Joanne Osborne, Joel John, Lorenzo Sierra on the Democratic side, lost as well. Is the primary system currently set up in a way that actually reflects voters' wishes? The idea that one would think if voters want people who get things done, you and some of the colleagues I mentioned would have fit in that category.
The challenge of a primary is of course bigger than one subset of the structure. I have come to believe that entrenched structures. I have a drawing. Here's my drawing. Okay, check that out.
We know you're an artist, yes.
So they breed people with very big mouths and very small ears, and so the primary seems to be the feeding frenzy of the extremes. And you can just look at the numbers of how Steve reviewed some of them, but if you took the entire amount of eligible humans who could vote if they were to register, then you took the number of registered voters, and then the number of each party, and then those who voted within that party in a primary, you can see that a very small number of voices, it drives a very big ship, guides a very big ship. And there is something to be said for anger and rhetoric and inflammatory language, and for those who get tired of it. I've talked to, so as usual, you ask me a short question, I give some lengthy angle. Do I think that there should be restructuring? Yes, based on a simple principle. Parties are not in the Constitution. There's no structure in the Constitution that says there will be parties. That's an invention. It's a invention of convenience to try to get people energized and some organization, but it could be any number of clubs in concert. It could be any group. It could be religious. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be this way. And the surrounding laws that make that happen, which are part of the Constitution, authorizing states to control how elections are run and their structures, those could be changed. It could also be changed by the people, because changing it within the system, you're just giving the people who are currently in power a chance to stay that way. And so it's as the dictum says, those inside the structure will fight harder to preserve it than those on the outside will to conquer it. And so
let's have Supervisor Gates weigh in on this. Supervisor Gates, let me ask you about the idea of the percentage of, I should go to Stephen Richer on this one. These are numbers guy. Supervisor Gates, let me ask you first of all about what Speaker Bowers had to say about the percentage of people who are actually deciding these things in the primaries. It's a percentage of a percentage of a percentage, and yet it does come down to, at this point, some of the loudest voices. Do you think would you be open to the idea of trying another system?
I would be open to it. I agree with the comments that have been made, and I have experience in a different type of system. I ran for the Phoenix City Council 3 times, and that is an open primary. Top 2 people, nonpartisan, top 2 people then go to a runoff. And it's not a perfect system either, but I would point to as a great example of, you talk about people who get stuff done. Let's look at Thelda Williams. Thelda Williams represented a very conservative area for many years on the Phoenix City Council. Frankly, I don't think Thelda would have won primary. Maybe she would have. Great politician, but it would have been challenging. But Thelda was reelected several times as a Republican. She is a Republican, nonpartisan race. But she, because of the way she positioned herself and because of the electoral system, she was in a position where she could go between, building it, becoming part of shifting coalitions, working with the Republicans sometimes, Democrats other times. And I think any followers of the Phoenix City Council would say it was a better body because Thelda Williams served on it.
Well, so that begs a very important question that I want all of you to weigh in. But Bill, let me start with you on that. When you're in a position of someone who is either in the phrase getting things done, or someone, as you mentioned, Thelda Williams, how potentially could campaigning, could messaging change if we don't have to deal quite as much with that phrase we always hear about, feeding the base? That's red meat for our base. And certainly there are people who are going to agree more with a candidate than others. But if you have a certain premise of an idea in a broader sort of spectrum, as opposed to just a typical primary, would the discussion change in terms of a campaign? Would voters potentially get more information?
I think it might. Along with my 2 colleagues here, we're 3 proud Republicans. We're proud of what our party stands for. But at the same time, I certainly think it's important. I think they would agree that we be speaking to everyone, speaking to all of the residents of Arizona, Maricopa County, our legislative district, whatever we might be talking about. And if your job is to be, let's take the top 2, to be one of those top 2, I think that message is going to shift a little bit. You're going to be talking more about issues that are important to the largest majority of voters, not just the base of your political party.
Stephen, again, nothing assured there, but could it potentially open up the idea to a different kind of campaign, which may benefit voters more because maybe they'll get more information as opposed to the red meat aspect?
I think candidates are, excuse me, candidates are for the most part rational actors who are, as David Mahy put it, single-minded seekers of re-election. And so I think that they will not necessarily change their fundamental approach, but I think that the buffet of items that is presented might change because they'll be speaking to a different population. If you are speaking to, as Speaker Bowers suggested, a narrow subset of the electorate, then you're going to speak to what is on the mind of those people. And that seems to be the border, because we saw everyone from state legislators to people like Secretary of State filming commercials of them walking alongside the border. And you say, well, what the heck does the Secretary of State have to do with the border? And so you see that they will cater to that. I don't know that it will necessarily be a massive broadening of the issues that people speak to or a depth of the manner in which they approach it. But I think that the issues that they do focus on will have to be more reflective of whatever the electorate becomes.
Speaker Bowers, let's talk less about the issue specifically and how an issue would be discussed, because as Recorder Richard mentions, I mean, everyone talks about the border, obviously a very important issue in this state and
Sure.
across the country. And yet people saying the border's a problem, the border's a problem. If there's a broader base of an electorate you have to appeal to, should voters then expect, wow, maybe they'll actually bring up what solutions could be, as opposed to just the idea and the concept?
I do think that a benefit of a different system would be that you couldn't be single-minded all the time unless that particular issue affected everybody all the time, like water. Everybody, even O'Halloran now is chiming in about Arabs taking our water and, putting it in whatever horse feed. I'm saying, where's he been? That came up 10 years ago, but suddenly it's filtered up to the hallowed heights of Mr. O'Halloran's office, and and that's an interest to him. I'm thinking, really? How many horses have you ridden? How many tomatoes have you eaten from Mexico? Or how many flowers have you given to somebody from Ecuador? We export water all over the world. What is the challenge? And in an election where an issue affects everyone, like water does here in Arizona, you're going to have to get people who can really be up to date all the time, not just a little soundbite, but I think it would encourage a more in-depth knowledge on behalf of the desired elected. They would have to know a little bit more about issues, at least to be able to speak to them with any authority.
Supervisor Gates, all of you obviously have had to appeal to voters at various points, but how much of it does come down to a candidate or a campaign offering up broader thoughts, deeper thoughts about a particular issue? I mean, as the Recorder said, elected officials run for office to win. I mean, that's certainly the purpose of it. And yet, are there expectations that candidates could, in fact, broaden some of these topics out themselves, as the speaker mentions about water, or do, in the current system, and maybe even in any system, but more so in the current system, do candidates really just have to speak to what voters want and not sort of say, well, voters, I'll tell you what you want. Here's your spinach, here's your broccoli, even if it's needed at a particular moment?
Well, this is a great question, right? Are we just supposed to simply mirror exactly what the people want, or are we supposed to lead and maybe tell them things they don't want to hear? And we could spend a whole hour on that topic alone. But I think, if in our current system, candidates started talking about these broader issues, less on kind of the hot button issues for the base, I think the evidence has shown that those candidates don't typically win primaries right now. They're not winning. It's those who are appealing to the base. And so I think this is a time, given the myriad of challenges that we're facing as a republic right now, This is a very good time to have this discussion. And again, as Speaker Bowers pointed out, the party system is not enshrined in the Constitution. It's been an important part of our system for years. And, I'm not advocating getting rid of parties in any way, but is there a way to broaden the discussion in our elections? And does it involve some tweaking of the party's essential monopoly that they have on the system right now, or duopoly, actually?
Speaker Bowers, Supervisor Gates mentioned a moment ago the idea of a top two. Obviously, ranked choice voting is another thing that has popped up recently. In Alaska, we have Nevada considering a change to its system coming up this November. Do you think it is worth a serious consideration of what's going on, considering where we are with the electorate, where we are with elected officials?
Every structure was defended. Okay. Now let's think about a new structure. A structure like that, there are challenges with it. No structure is perfect, as Bill just said. No structure is perfect. There are inherent weaknesses, but the common denominator is the people. If there is going to be a vote, then how is that to be administered? And what structure brings stability or outcomes that are long-term rather than short-term? We just came back from Israel. They have a tenuous coalition of very disparate thoughts and groups, from hard radical Islamics into mainstream of the general Israeli population and other places around the world. I'm not advocating that either. Whatever we structure will have weaknesses and strengths. But I do notice that Sarah Palin didn't win, and that in ranked choice voting, you have one vote and you get to cast it for four different people. And so that's when the intrigues start coming in. Okay, if mine doesn't win the first time, who would I want to win the second time? Or who would I want to support the second time? For what reason? Is the reason that they're good, or is the reason that they're the worst? And therefore, generally the electorate will pick somebody else. But you only get one. It's not like five. And so your choice will have a great determination. I frankly think it makes people think a lot more about who they're going to elect and why. And so in that case, the more radical part of the population on both ends didn't win. It was people more in the middle. And that's the people who actually today are feeling a little bit besieged by the Sonoran Cowboys on the left and the MS-13 on the right, and feel like in the middle that they're being forced one way or the other, and the extortion and intimidation reigns in an election and around it. So I don't think what we have is all that perfect. And why is that? Because of the intent of those involved. And so when the general population agrees with that intent, then you got a problem.
Stephen, you're definitely a scholar. Just weigh in on the ranked choice concept for me, whether it's ranked choice 4, ranked choice 5, or a top 2. You don't have to give your opinion on what you'd prefer, but do you think it is a worth a discussion that could help the system evolve?
I am a student of public choice, and so any student of public choice knows that the method through which we select our elected officials is incredibly important. And to something that Rusty said previously, this wasn't preordained by God when he created the heavens and the earth, that there would also be this primary system with two political parties. And I think any student of American history knows that we didn't even used to always have these two political parties, and states like Louisiana have never done it this way. And so I think what is important is that less what is the perfect system, but the recognition that the manner in which you elect people is materially important, that it is a false notion that the same candidates would win no matter the format that you do it in. And though I don't have statistical backing for this, and it would be hard to quantify anyway, so I'm loath to make this comment, but there does seem to be an incongruity with what we profess that we want, which is people who get stuff done, as you said, who work with whomever to achieve solutions. And then what we see bubbling up to our general elections, which is people who demonize those who are on the opposite side, or perhaps sort of run to the most the furthest end of the political conversation. I'm not putting a value statement on that. I'm just simply noting what I perceive to be an incongruity.
So we're talking hypotheticals, and Speaker Bowers, let me ask you about this. Unfortunately, all three of you were subjected to unwarranted attacks on your character, on everything about you, frankly, by people who were did not believe the results of the 2020 election, or at least acted like they didn't, or whatever it may have been. With a different system, is there a possibility of the electorate being able to choose from, these are my words, less extreme candidates on both sides, and therefore does it make it less likely that the aftermath of something like 2020 is able to happen?
I don't know if the outcome by person, individual, would be so much different, but the individual candidate would certainly have to change their tactics. And so your rhetoric would move from, rah, rah, the border, or the election was stolen, it was stolen. I don't need no stinking proof. I just have this gut feeling that it was stolen. I mean, there were so many people at the rally. How could we lose? So someone's going to have to change their general mentality of how they run stuff, and that would be us, the people trying to attract that support. So then you're going to have to say, well, I did more than just legalize chickens in the backyard. I did X, Y, and Z. I am important to you for this reason or these reasons. And so you're on one side is the candidate, on the other side is the people. We're a fast food, fast education, fast, give me a pay raise. Everything's fast. And if you're asking me to think about it, don't ask me to think for long, because we know your third grade level news. Let's keep it short, keep it simple, keep it fast, keep it tantalizing. When you have a population geared towards that, then you've got another side of this equation. Is there a responsibility for people to educate themselves truly on what's around them? So it's broader, but yes, it would change the rhetoric, and you would have to probably put a lot more of your capability on the table so people could examine it if they wanted to.
Supervisor Gates, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, take, for example, my district, District 3, Maricopa County. It's a tale of two regions. The north is very red, and the southern portions of the district are very blue. So independents are actually the top group of registered voters. But to win a primary in that purple district, you're going to have to run to the right. And to win a for the Republicans and for the Democrats, you're going to have to run to the left. That's how you're going to win. So that means that we could very well have two people who are sort of more to the extremes of their parties trying to win the seat of an extremely purple district. I mean, so is that person, whoever wins out there, more representative of the district than if we had a top two system? I think it's, and really that reflects Arizona as well. We're now sort of the quintessential swing state, maybe along with Georgia. And so to see that the Republican Party, may have nominated some, what I would argue, are people taking some extreme positions on things like the 2020 election, that doesn't seem reflective of what's become, a light red to purple state.
Stephen, Richard, I have to come to you on this one as well. The idea of, again, bringing up how I introduced the question, what the three of you and others were subjected to. Supervisor Gates even had the joy of maybe being threatened with jail time when it came to all this because of all the things that were ginned up to some extent. So again, Supervisor Gates brings up top two. We're talking a bit about ranked choice voting as well. Is there the possibility, not guaranteed, but is there the possibility that the more options there are, is there a chance of getting people who would be considered less extreme by those who are independents or in the middle?
Maybe. I mean, I certainly don't think we can do much worse on that particular issue, but I am loath to embrace the term extreme or moderate for a position such as this, which is not like, do you support zero state income tax like me? Or do you support somewhere in the middle? Or do you support something like the state of Oregon, which is extreme? This is not a sliding scale of policy preference. This is a binary 2 + 2 = 4. And so I think in this manner, you are simply taking a position that is 100% falsifiable and is destructive to our democracy. But unfortunately, and they all know this, or at least 90% of them know this. 90% of the people who are parroting this claim know this. But again, going back to politicians will do, for the most part, there are exceptions, maybe like Rusty, will do what is necessary to be reelected, and that they see that a percentage of, especially the Republican primary electorate, absolutely demands fealty to this false notion, and therefore they will cater to that. And it becomes this vicious cycle where you have a populace saying, well, I'm hearing it from my elected officials that the election was stolen, and the elected official saying in private, I know it wasn't stolen, but my voting electorate demands it from me. And so you're stuck in a continuous feedback loop until something, I don't know, disrupts the system.
Well, Speaker Bowers, that brings me to what you said about the parties not being in the Constitution. So what Stephen Richard just said there, who's benefiting from the current system? That's a change up right down the middle for you. It's about 79 miles an hour. You can take this one out of the park if you want to. Who benefits from the current system?
Extremists. I've felt it. I've seen it. The intimidation of those who are on the fringe of extremism to join in. There's a lot of research done on propaganda, and people who are highly propagandized. This is Eliul, I think is his name. His book's one of those, and they tend to do two things. If you're in the middle between two propagandizing groups, or one that is just unbelievably like, and we're never supposed to mention the Nazis, but the propaganda machine of during the Weimar Republic is so intimidating, and up to physical intimidation, even up to murder, ultimately, that you either fled or you buried yourself in one of the two parties and just started waving the banner and please don't shoot me. And I see that. I personally, maybe I'm just looking for that, but I see it everywhere, where people who are otherwise thoughtful have suddenly they wave the banner because they just can't take it anymore. They don't want to take it anymore. They don't want to be constantly barraged with propaganda. So if you had top two, where's the propaganda going to come from? It would have to be at least more issue oriented. We want the border closed. We want water. We want educational X. You'd have to be more issue oriented, simply because you have to have some way to get to the electorate. What would you beat them with? Because you're not tying them one against the other. It would be issue against issue. And so then it becomes a decision between issues. And so you'd have to have I would think you would have a gradual movement of people towards one of the two. As it is now, we've got parties. When people are governed by self-discipline and a moral compass, they don't threaten people, no matter who they are. They're not extreme D's or R's threatening somebody, or intolerant, or vicious, or name calling, or classifying in order to get gain. Their better angels rule. When those don't rule, I don't know that any system can be corrupted when you don't have self-discipline to do what's right and do what's good. So I don't know if
Supervisor Gates, yeah. Well, let me follow up with Supervisor Gates. You said earlier that you're three proud Republicans, even though you don't agree with everything that the party does. When we see a growing percentage, and Arizona was, I think, ahead of the curve on this, and a growing number of people registering to be independents, when more people are thinking, if they agree with Speaker Bowers about there being more extremes out there, and more extremes being a part of the elected office and being elected to these different positions, is there a momentum out there that independents could in fact bring to more pragmatic folks like the three of you to say, well, the party system as it's constituted really is only benefiting those who are not just members of parties as you are, but those who are attending all the meetings, the precinct committee people, whatever it may be, as opposed to going back to the phrase of getting things done. Are independents out there enough to create an appetite for this? Or does it have to come from those who've been members of parties for a long time? Just say, the next system's not going to be perfect either, but this one needs blowing up.
I mean, I think it's possible. There's certainly more people than ever who are independents, and with our young people, we are seeing them registering independent at much higher rates than we ever did and our parents did. But there are still so many barriers to entry for independents. I mean, for example, when we had the two nominees had been set for our statewide offices, if someone said, hey, based upon this choice, I want to run as an independent, it was too late already. It was too late. You had to start before we knew who was going to be in the championship game. So that's one of the issues. The other thing is, too, independent, we call them a group. Republicans, again, big tent party. That certainly has been my vision, and I think of a lot of Republicans. So you've got varied views, but there's still some basic principles. Democratic Party, same thing, some basic principles that unify them. Independents, and we saw this with I think it's called the Forward Party that was just formed. What would independence stand for? So that, that would be an interesting thing as well. And I think one of the concerns that I would have with independence is that it would become even more about personality than policy. Hopefully I'm wrong on that, but I think that is one of the things. Again, traditionally parties have helped by having platforms that help to kind of organize the thoughts and approaches of a party. But, having said that, we are going to face a time here soon as more and more people register as independents, that I think you will again see some serious independent candidates, but there's still tons of barriers in the way in our current system.
Yeah, Stephen Richer, when you see the registration numbers of independents and how much they continue to grow in Arizona and across the country, does it make you think that there actually is, even as what Supervisor Gates said, yes, there's not a necessarily consistent set of principles as the Republican and Democratic parties may have. Is there some sort of momentum there? Could there be some sort of momentum? We know also, if you wouldn't mind jumping in on this as I change my momentum a little bit, even just the number of signatures and the challenges for independents to do that, even after the championship game has been decided, as Supervisor Gates just said. A lot of questions in there, but try to muddle through.
Well, the latter is an objective question, so I can get you that number. If you were running countywide for this current cycle, so as our county attorney is now doing, thanks to the special election that was called for that, and as the county clerk, because he is up on the opposite year that the rest of the county positions are up. So Jeff Fine needed to collect a minimum of 4,528 signatures to run for clerk of the Superior Court as a Republican. If he had wanted to run as an independent, he would have needed to collect a minimum of 27,120 signatures. So approximately 6 times the number of signatures. And of course, if you have to collect a minimum of 27,000, that means you need to collect probably closer to like 50,000, which all of a sudden starts to look like you're trying to get an initiative on the ballot. And so there are certainly impediments to impediments to running as an independent. And as Bill mentioned, and one that I hadn't even really given much thought to, is sometimes the appetite for another way might only become apparent when you know who's in that championship game. So I think that's a really good point. But yeah, this isn't, I think we're often talking about it in the context of the Republican Party right now, but certainly, for a state that talks about wanting to be a maverick state, that wants to buck, party trends, do what's right, yada, yada, yada. Senator Sinema has sure had a rough go as probably one of the leading compromising get stuff done, whether it was transportation or water or things like that, voices in the US Senate. But I believe she has been subjected to some less than perfectly pleasant comments from members of her party. And so again, it's an interesting incongruity with what is being asked for by the public at large, supposedly, and what is being demanded by maybe the loudest members of your party. And then the last thing I would say is, I'm a pretty radical libertarian, and I hate the notion of this duopoly that is a government granted duopoly to private political entities. I think I would prefer a system in which that is merely a nomenclature that you can use to designate yourself in certain manners, just like being LDS or something like that might attribute certain associations to you if you call yourself a Republican, but that you're given sort of special status and a special path to being an elected official, I don't know is necessarily right. And then I think it also has a pernicious effect on your behavior, because I think that too often now we gravitate towards positions that are not necessarily consistent with our political philosophy, but simply because they're R or D. And I think we saw this in the state legislature with whether or not businesses can ask employees can be vaccinated. And I think that there's a lot of sort of libertarian-minded legislators in the state legislature who would have said, well, of course, it's a private business. You can ask your employees to be vaccinated, who did not vote that way because the culture warriors of the Republican Party were demanding otherwise, and they went that way. And so I just think that was a way in which, you're being forced to identify with one of the duopoly parties maybe trumped what I think was a healthy political philosophy approach.
Speaker Bowers, go ahead.
Something came to mind, and that is when you read off those numbers, I thought, whatever happened to the idea, the legal notion of one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote? If you choose to not participate in a social club, a party, that you have to find your barrier in order to participate is that much higher. How is that legally fair? That's my question.
Well, let me have you jump in with something else on that, which is that the primary system as it's set up is paid for by taxpayers, many of whom are no longer members of either party. What do you think of that? It's
totally unfair. I think it's litigable. And I think there should be some action taken about it. Straight up. Not fair.
Supervisor Gates, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. It seems fundamentally unfair. And I think that's something that may find its way before people smarter than me in the near future, because it doesn't make sense.
Stephen, on that?
Come on, Steve.
Radical
come on.
libertarian?
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
We've got a wave going. Yes.
Speaker Bowers, we have a question from one of our attendees here. What do you say about so-called extremists who are just regular Joes fed up with either party and decide to side with one because they know there is drive and power behind the Democrats and the Republicans? Are they extremists, or are they just fed up, concerned Arizonans? Suppose we could put them in different. Maybe the extremists are the ones that came to your house, and the other people can be regular Joes.
There's an interesting conundrum. Read the book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, The Ordinary German People. That was a great book, is a great book. Everybody should read that book. And that, in essence, when you liberate any thought from anybody, and you can hide behind a party, or you can justify it according to any particular heavy wave of sentiment, you get a really nasty place to live. And so if you're just a regular Joe and you don't believe so, and you're just hiding for some other reason, people do that all the time. I'm a member of a religious group. If I'm there just as a social, to make myself look righteous so people will do more business with me, that's certainly not in any way godlike or enlivening, but you could be there. You're at least you're not out shooting people on the streets or any other less than perfect reason. That's how we all operate. We all do things for less than perfect reasons. The point is, are we trying to do better, or are we just trying to justify? But I appreciate the conundrum. Yes, there are people who do things for different reasons and are party members for different reasons. But I do think that this particular place that we live, which has long been a question, is not fair to everyone as it should be. It's only fair for those who choose to associate with one club or another. It's either the Crips or the Bloods, or leave the neighborhood. Which one is it? Well, the people in El Salvador say, I'm going to America. And they really do live in those types of applications. We don't yet. I don't want us to. I'd like us to be a little more civil.
Supervisor Gates, again, not saying extremists or regular Joes, but let's talk about the regular Joes if we can keep them out of the extremist camp. Would a top two primary, would a ranked choice voting give those people better outlets for some of their frustration with the parties, as opposed to? Okay, and Supervisor Gates, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, this is one of the interesting things about what's going on in the past few cycles. We have seen historic votes, historic rates of participation. That's a really good thing. I think we don't talk about that enough. I'm excited about that. I think that's a wonderful thing. What I'm concerned about is people who are engaging in the political process who have no interest in working with other people, who it's their it's their way or the highway. It's people who are, some of them, trying to destroy the system. I like this system. I think we have a good system. It has lasted a long time. It is based in the US and Arizona constitutions. Should we reform it? Absolutely. But people who are getting engaged and are spreading lies in an effort to tear this system down, that's not a positive. And that, as has been said by my colleagues here, that is not going to be cured simply by a change in system, in electoral system. But to the extent that a change in system changes the discussion, makes it more civil, that is exactly what we need right now.
Stephen, Richard, forgive me for coming back to the radical libertarian aspect of this, but for years we'd seen Republicans, Democrats, and then the libertarian candidate might get between 2 and 5% of the vote and is in there. If we had a different system potentially set up, would that get more ideas like libertarian ideas actually out there to voters who could say, this person has some purple, some red, some blue, as opposed to, I guess I'm just wondering if again, I keep coming back to this thought process of, and maybe I'm giving voters too much credit, but the idea, the ones who do want to think about it, if there is a nuance aspect, because we've seen this, we saw, you mentioned Senator Sinema before. We saw those, was it 180,000 voters who in 2018 voted for both Governor Ducey and Senator Sinema? People are capable of doing it, aren't they?
They are. I think it becomes, especially at the general election stage, but the general election stage is the only stage in our current system in which you can say the body of voters prefer candidate X to candidate Y. In a primary, when you have 5 different candidates running, you can't say that because it's not a clear transitive property where everyone would prefer candidate A first, then candidate B, then candidate C. And so again, just going back to the notion that public choice matters, how you elect people matters. And in a primary, if you reorganize that, you might come up with different outcomes. But I will say that I think that we do have a broader social problem that is going on right now, and that's this I mean, ultimately, what amounts to cancel culture that Rusty and Bill are talking about, and that's that dissenting voices are, or even just things that we don't like, we're greeting with threats and hostility, and I think that isn't solved necessarily. Maybe the conversation's changed, like Bill said, but I think that's a cultural question that we need to grapple with on maybe a different panel. But when you don't like the warrant that a magistrate judge issues, or you don't like the opinion that a United States Supreme Court justice issues, the answer can't be to try and go kill that person. When Rusty says something that you don't like, the answer can't be to bring a gun to outside of his house and call him a pedophile and harass his family. That's a sickness, and I think it's a sickness that has been forgiven at many political levels because perhaps of the system that we are currently electing people in.
Steve?
Well, Stephen, is that leading? I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. To get back to your question of how do you get maybe these libertarian views, other views maybe that the new average Joe, the average Joe who's involved, how do you get that into the system? I think the way you do it is going to proportional representation. I'm not advocating for that, but that's how you do that. And certainly a lot of, European countries and other democracies have determined that approach. But I think that's the way to accomplish that.
Yeah, the way we are structured as an entire country, not just a state, with the first past the post, winner takes all, it will always be very challenging for a third party to get there. You would have to have a parliamentary style like Italy, like Israel was mentioned previously. There are pros and cons to that, but it certainly would give a purchase. Now, Bill could speak to whether having your party ID stripped from your name in a municipal top two system would allow somebody to take more heterodox opinions from the party orthodoxy. So I'd be interested in hearing about whether he felt like he had sort of more latitude in his public policy preferences.
Well, Bill, let me follow up on that though. If there were a ranked choice voting system or a top two primary system, does it make more sense to have the number of candidates running who are not running in a party primary? As we said, it would be I'm calling it with ranked choice an open sort of primary, if I'm phrasing it correctly. Better off to have the R, the D, whatever after the person's name, or not? Would it give voters more information to have that R and D? And yet again, you're running against all the other R's and D's. You're not just running against three other Republicans in a primary, for example.
I would say probably, I would be open to either approach there because again, I think the open primary is going to be an improvement over our current system. I do think in city elections, municipal elections, it makes sense to have nonpartisan races, but I think Tucson, they have partisan races, so it can be done. I don't think that's a major issue just because people are very sophisticated today. They have the internet, and trust me, as someone who ran in nonpartisan elections 3 times, a lot of people found out my party registration. That was the number one question that I would get asked as a candidate. So I think even if you try and strip it of there, people are going to find out, unless you're truly an independent. But that's what you are. You're an independent.
Rusty, I want to come back to you a bit, if we could have a relatively short answer on this one. When Stephen mentioned the cancel culture, relatively, I said relatively. The cancel culture comment, which can mean a lot of different things, but the way the current system is set up, and I'm talking about the current primary system in particular, if we had a different system, ranked choice voting, top two, whatever it is, would we have less erosion of candidates? Are we seeing quote unquote fewer good people running because of this? Frankly, what the three of you went through and a lot of other people went through after the so-called recount of 2020, if we had a different system set up, would we have more people who are willing to run for office? Are those connected in any way?
Well, I don't know that the cultural erosion is because there are two parties in America or anywhere on the planet, their system. I think it is what happens in that system is due to a cultural erosion, a spiritual erosion, an economic erosion. There are lots of drivers that people can use to justify, or that can affect them, where they start acting in ways that are totally inappropriate to maintaining civility or a civilization. So I don't know that the system makes me a better person, but if I'm a better person, I tend to take more care in whatever system I'm in to learn more, to be less quick to judge, or just have my top 5 issues or one issue. And if you bang on that bell long enough, I'll vote for you. It is interesting that in the advertising for this program, I get and I would guess, because I don't communicate with him anymore, my legislative district chair sends me a note, says, "Oh, so now you're going to throw the party under the bus for RCV." And I said, I didn't say I was doing that, but it doesn't matter. I just mentioned it. I mentioned in a conversation with it, and the extreme response from my chair, which has been the norm throughout the whole election. I mean, the fix was in my district. So but the extreme response is immediate. Bam, get the guillotine. He's one of the RCV guys. Get rid of him. It's like that mentality. It just shows ignorance, and it just pounds on the gong of ignorance, rather than, well, let's talk about it. Well, you're participating in this panel. What are your thoughts? Oh, no. That takes too much time. I can sharpen my blade in a lot shorter time than it takes to have that conversation.
I just want to be
Bill,
clear that
yeah,
I
go
think
ahead, Stephen, yeah.
by the fixes in, I think Rusty was alluding to the party mechanics rather than the administration of the election. I just want to be clear on
Thank you
that.
for that clarification.
That's better, Richard.
Important at this point, yes.
And the fix is in. Of course, it applies to however you want it, but I'm talking about my LD. They're the ones who say, "Oh, the thing was stolen. It was all rigged." And I'm saying, when you stand up in the first meeting as the presidency of the district and say, "I'm here to elect Mr. Farnsworth," and you're the leadership of the district, I'd say the fix was in.
Okay, gentlemen, let's spend our last few minutes with a couple more participant questions here. I like this one about independence. Let me go up to this one and read it all to you. Supervisor Gates, start us on this one. With the number of independents able to vote, and specifically, in this case, the Republican primary, all 3 of you being Republicans, would any of you advocate for doing away with independents being able to vote in your primaries to keep them from the club mentality?
I would not. I think that it's important, for the reasons that have already been expressed, that independents do have an opportunity to pick a ballot and vote and have their voice heard.
Do you think they should have a higher threshold?
Oh, Rusty, go ahead.
The idea of having more required signatures to participate or anything as a candidate. You think that should be higher when there's more of them than either of the other 2 camps?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, any of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's appropriate because they don't have to go through a primary, but I don't think it should be as out of whack as Stephen just described.
Okay.
Stephen, what do you think about the concept of keeping independents out? Speak as a Republican, not as a reporter right now.
I think the Republican Party should be able to have any sort of internal election that it wants to have, just as it designates its own leadership. It can limit that to state committeemen who have to come up through the precinct committee process. When you are funding it through public dollars and you are putting it in charge of public offices, then I think that there is something inherently inappropriate with excluding the plurality or the largest block of voters in Maricopa County and probably soon the state of Arizona. So no, I don't think that's appropriate.
Rusty, one more audience question here. Who does the panel, so that would be the 3 of you. I'm glad I edited this on the fly. Who do you guys see as potential supporters and likely opponents to this kind of change? Because people will say, I mean, there are people I've spoken to who will say, not sure if I like ranked choice. I'm not sure if I like top two, but if both parties are against it, must be a good idea. What do you think?
I think you answered the question.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think those that want to do something other than, as Rusty said, just sharpen their blade and actually want to have a good discussion of the issues, I think those people would take a second look at this as well.
Stephen?
The entrenched, the people for whom the current format is working well, people for who would struggle mightily in a general election. For instance, I refuse to accept that Wendy Rogers could succeed in a general election in the state of Arizona. I refuse to think that that's where we're at in terms of decorum and morality as a state. But I think she is incredibly formidable in the current structure in her legislative district. So I suggest that she would fight tooth and claw to preserve this system.
A final question for you, Supervisor Gates. Let me start with you. We have to be pretty quick with this, total of about 2 minutes for all of you. Would it make sense to give voters in Arizona a chance in 2024 to consider switching to ranked choice voting, switching to top two? And would your opinion change depending on how November's results go?
My opinion on that would not change based upon this November's results. I mean, that's the beauty of our system here, is that in Arizona, you know, not all states have initiative, but in Arizona, we have initiative. And if somebody wants to go out and get the signatures, raise the money, get it on the ballot, put it in front of the voters, I think that's great. And then let the you know, people fight it out and have the discussion and put the very best arguments. And if people want to point to some of the results that have recently occurred as arguments as to why, you know, maybe going to open primaries, for example, I think that's great. But I also think, you know, ranked choice voting, if that would be there, we'd need to have a real deep discussion about what all that means. I think there's some confusion out there. And, you know, I am a little hesitant about systems that are going to introduce confusion into the electoral system. But put it out there, let the people debate it and vote on it.
But Bill,
Okay. Speaker Bowers, brief with this. Yeah.
our system encourages confusion. Like somebody put yesterday in your Cap Times thing, that in some districts, nobody knows what to believe because the social media is so saturating on, oh, X said this, no, Y said that, no, Y said this, that. Who would know? That's when it takes somebody who's got a lot more perception, you know, capability than I do. But the feeding frenzy for information is to lie. And you can get away with it. There's no truth meter in the internet. It's all good. Say whatever.
I agree. And there's not a lot of truth meter, unfortunately, and a lot of members of our party as well, Rusty.
Totally
Yeah,
fair.
I think that if you believe that politics is broken right now, and I think that I could be convinced that it is fractured, if not broken right now, then you want to improve it, and you can improve it by a fundamental change and reawakening of society that will require intellectual and spiritual power that are beyond my abilities. Or you can start to look at least changing the manner in which we elect our leadership, and maybe that will have an effect of changing the conversation, and then maybe that will change the political system. But I think that we're increasingly feeling, I mean, this is documented, that more and more people are worried about the state of democracy on both political sides, and more people are worried about conversations. More and more people think that civil war is a possibility in the coming years. And so the current system is struggling right now. And this is perhaps one way that it could be improved.
All right, gentlemen, I have to stop there. Thanks to Save Democracy AZ. To learn more and whether you agree or disagree, go to savedemocracyaz.com. It's a coalition of Arizona citizens intending to educate voters of the challenges facing the state. And it's brought about by our partisan primary system to explore alternative voting reforms that would make elections work better for all citizens. You can scan that QR code. You can also, again, go to www.savedemocracyaz.com. Thanks to the Arizona Capital Times. Of course, thanks to all of you for taking part and watching and listening. And thanks to our great participants, Arizona Speaker Rusty Bowers, Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates, Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer. Thanks all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.